Welcome to Sport Walk. How much do you know about hydration? I mean, really know about hydration. Well, if it's not that much, then don't worry, because you're probably not alone. You see, traditionally, we walkers, with the exception of race walkers, haven't really been that bothered about the intricacies of hydration science. Usually, it's just a bottle of squash, drunk whenever we stop to take a break or to admire a nice view. I wouldn't say that taking an interest in proper hydration is frowned upon, it's just not really considered that important. I guess walkers view what they do differently to, say, runners or cyclists. Maybe it's because walking is predominantly done for active relaxation, and it's more about the places you go and the landscapes you immerse yourselves in than how well you perform physically. Of course, when you step up to sport walking, the importance of hydration moves front and centre. Your work rate is higher and sweating becomes a key factor, and this is where hydration gets a little more complicated, because it's what you lose in your sweat that'll have an impact if you don't replenish it while you walk. Now, I'm no sports scientist and my knowledge is limited, which is why I've brought along a friend. Andy Blow is the founder of Precision Hydration, and these guys really know their stuff when it comes to drinking right in endurance sport. So there's no one better to help us understand the intricacies of hydration. So let's start right at the beginning. When we're active, especially if we do exercise, our bodies generate heat, even if the activity level is minimal, and we sweat in order to release that heat. That's essentially the purpose of sweat, to stop us overheating. And we all know what happens when things overheat. They shut down. The fact that we sweat explains why we can travel long distances. By sweating, we're able to control our body temperature, while animals that can't sweat, like dogs for instance, have to keep stopping and panting in order to bring their body temperature back down to a safe level. If we didn't sweat, we'd have to stop and pant as well. It's not a very nice thought, is it? But of course, there is a downside, and that is that while we sweat, we lose essential bodily fluids and minerals, and we need to replenish them or we're going to end up in a bad way, which is where drinking comes in. So far, so obvious. But it's not simply a case of losing and replenishing fluid. Your sweat isn't just water, it's a complex mixture of elements, and what you drink needs to replace those elements in the right quantities, otherwise you're going to be deficient in something important. Now, we've all heard about electrolytes. These are the things that are lost in your sweat, and they're what you need in your drink to replenish those losses. But exactly which electrolytes should you prioritise in your drink?
Sodium is definitely the most important electrolyte when we're talking about rehydration and hydration when it comes to sweating. And the reason for that is that sodium is the predominant electrolyte in our extracellular fluid. And it's from the extracellular fluid, from your blood plasma in fact, that sweat is drawn, which is why we lose more sodium in sweat than anything else. The role that sodium plays in the body is very, very important. It's involved with nerve conduction, muscle contraction, absorption of nutrients in the gut, and we have to maintain a pretty stable level of it in the bloodstream at all times for optimum health and performance.
Something that I didn't realise before I started to learn more about performance hydration is that we all sweat at different rates, and we all lose different amounts of sodium in our sweat. Now, the different sweat rate thing kind of makes sense to us really, doesn't it? Because let's face it, we've all seen someone out there who's working really hard and barely breaking into a sweat, while someone else nearby has lost 5 pounds just thinking about going for a walk. In everyday situations, we're used to seeing the difference in how much people sweat, but the minerals being lost in that sweat are invisible to us, which is why it's so important that we understand what's going on.
It seems from all the testing data that's available that human sweat sodium levels can vary dramatically from person to person. When we do sweat tests with people, some lose as little as 200 milligrams of sodium per litre of sweat, others can lose over 2,000. So we're talking about a 10-fold difference in the amount of salt that people lose in their sweat. If you're someone who loses a small amount of sodium, you always tend to lose a small amount of sodium. If you lose a very large amount, you always tend to lose a relatively large amount. The first thing that can tell you if you've got some saltier sweat than average is if you see a buildup of salt crystals on your kit, clothing and skin when you're doing exercise in the heat. When the fluid evaporates, it dries and leaves a salty residue.
Okay, so by now you've probably got a rough idea as to whether or not you're losing a lot of sodium in your sweat. But even if, like me, you don't sweat a lot and you don't see those telltale signs of high sodium loss on your clothing, it doesn't mean you can just kick back and not worry about drinking. We all need to drink while we're walking, just to keep our bodies functioning properly. Otherwise, you could end up dehydrated, which can cause all sorts of problems.
The problems that dehydration cause in the body when you're exercising largely stem from one thing, a reduction in blood volume. And that's because as you sweat, the plasma, which is the watery part of your blood, is essentially what evaporates off the skin to dissipate heat. Now, when your blood volume decreases, it causes a number of problems. It means that you can't sweat as much. It means that your skin temperature and core temperature go up. It means that your body's going to use more glycogen and a whole host of other things which actually slow you down. It all, though, stems from the fact that your blood gets thicker and harder to move around the body and there's less of it.
Now, I don't know about you, but having thicker blood is not something that I aspire to, especially when it's so easy not to get to that point. But a warning, there is a flip side to dehydration, and it's just as dangerous, possibly more so. There's a condition called hypernatremia, which is brought on when you don't replenish enough sodium when you sweat. So that's like if you're just drinking too much plain water on a hot day and you're effectively flushing most of the minerals out of your system.
The reason that hypernatremia is such a problem is that in order to defend the level of sodium in your blood, what the body does with excess fluid is it pushes it out of the bloodstream into your body's cells, causing them to swell up. So people who are starting to become hypernatremic sometimes have puffy fingers, puffy ankles, because they're absorbing more fluid. Now, the problem happens if that fluid starts to get absorbed into your brain cells because they swell up and start to push on the inside of your skull. If that gets bad enough, then you can have headaches, you can go into a coma, and you can even die. There have been 14 reported deaths from hypernatremia in the last 20 or so years in endurance events, so this is a real problem. Symptoms of hypernatremia are nausea, lethargy, weakness, cramps, the kind of things that people often misinterpret as being dehydration related. So this is one of the problems. Often people becoming hypernatremic actually then drink more in response to these symptoms and make the problem worse.
So essentially, you are walking a bit of a tightrope with your hydration. You need to make sure that you're drinking enough fluid to stay hydrated, but you also need to make sure you're getting enough electrolytes in what you drink, and especially enough sodium to protect you against hypernatremia. Now, if you're thinking that all this sounds a bit too much like hard work and a bit too complicated, and that you've been fine up to now, so why should you change? All I'd say is that it's really not that complicated, and it's really not that burdensome to get on top of your hydration. All you need to do is to try to understand how much you sweat and how much sodium you're losing in your sweat. And you can do that simply by looking at your clothing after you've gone walking. Now, the exact sodium levels that you'll need will differ from what I'd need or what someone else might need. So to get the best results, it does pay to take an online survey from a brand like Precision Hydration to confirm that what you suspect is correct. Then you just need to make sure that you drink an electrolyte mix when you're walking, rather than squash or other drinks. Forget the sweet fruity drinks that you think are helping you with energy given the sugars in them, and focus on getting the electrolyte mix right. The most important thing though is not to expect that all electrolyte drinks are going to provide you with the right amount of sodium that you need. So once you've established these basics and you understand what your sweat rate is and what your sweat sodium level is, then it's simply a question of habit building. And this is the next essential when it comes to drinking on your walks. If you're someone who typically just drinks when you stop to take a break or to look at a nice view, then you are going to have the biggest change to make. But if you think about it, you don't walk 10k and then just suddenly burst into a sweat, just as you don't walk 30k and then suddenly become dehydrated. So why drink that way? Sweating and fluid loss is a steady and continual process, and you need to replenish those fluids in the same way. That doesn't mean that you need to be constantly drinking. It just means that you need to be sipping your fluids regularly and often. I'd normally drink from a soft flask probably about every 10 minutes, but it's also really important to be drinking ahead of your thirst. So if you're feeling thirsty, it's too late. Now this is where the gear you use becomes really important, because if you're just using a rucksack with a bottle of drink inside or in a side pouch, you're not going to want to take the rucksack off to access your bottle every 10 minutes just so that you can stay hydrated. Ultra vests with pouches on the straps for soft flasks are the best option, because you can carry all the fluids you need and not have to faff to drink. You simply bend your head and sip whenever you need or want. For me, if I'm going for about 25k, then I'll just use two 500 to 600ml soft flasks carried in my front pouches with a high sodium electrolyte mix. If I'm going longer, say for about a marathon distance or for 50k, and there's no chance to replenish stocks along the way, then I'll add a bladder in the back with about 1.5 litres of electrolytes as well. The other really valuable adaptation to make is to understand the importance of starting hydrated in the first place. It's surprising how many people just think about what they might drink during the walk without realising they're starting out already mildly dehydrated. If you start out dehydrated but then drink correctly during your walk, you're still going to remain dehydrated. And this could mean that you feel fatigued more or have sore muscles, so even if you're not really that bothered about how you perform, you're not going to feel as good as you could. So always do what the guys at Precision Hydration call preloading. And this means having a bottle of quite strong electrolyte drink with a decent sodium level, something like Precision Hydration's pH 1500, about an hour before you start out. This gives the body enough time to absorb the minerals, and then you'll be starting out in the best possible shape. At the end of the day, making the switch to a better drinking regime isn't a huge inconvenience. It's just about taking the right kind of fluids with you to keep your body working the best it can. So there you go, everything you need to know about hydration. Now, I want to say a big thank you to Andy Blow for providing all of that technical information, because that was way above my pay grade. If you've got any questions you want to ask, pop a comment below, and if there's anything I can't answer myself, I'll fire it over to Precision Hydration and let you know what they say. And do please subscribe if you haven't done already, because we'd love to have you along as part of our Sport Walk community. But until the next time we meet, get those electrolytes down you.